Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we are back again with the Deborah Show, and I am Deborah Faye. And this evening, I have back with us CJ Perry, my cool. He says he's not cool, but to me, he's just always cool like that. He's just cool like that. And we had just finally nailed down Akamaye, his beautiful wife, whom we refer to artistically as changing frequency. And today, see, now all this time I've had CJ thinking, one thing that he's going to come on here and do. And today I took a different approach. I sent him a text message and said, CJ, what are we going to change it up? And I want you to do something different. Love it. And he's so mellow. He just sent me a text back real cool, like, okay, I'm an open book. I'm like, oh, you didn't panic on me or nothing. I love you for that, CJ. So here's how this evening's topic came about. I was on Instagram and I was, perusing around, and I came to Brother Mind Ascension, his page on Instagram, and it had a very, interesting topic. And that's how I got turned around. And I want CJ to address it. And it says, now, Brother Mind Ascension is on Instagram at mind_ascension.alkemy. If you want to, go on Instagram and follow him and see what he has to say. But I'm interested in what you have to say, CJ. Here we go. So I made a post about it. And one of my questions is, when a woman says to a man that he's predictable, does he find that offensive? And the topic is about predictability is what makes a man dependable. And it says the masculine energy is stable and predictable. Its strengths are willpower, clarity, and focus. The masculine energy likes to create structures and rules, so it knows how to apply the logic correctly. Another way to look at the masculine energy is as knowledge, whereas the feminine is knowing. And this is taken from a study, learn the difference between masculine and feminine energy. And so when we're dealing with a different approach to love, CJ, I need to know from you, is it offensive when a woman tells a man he's predictable? And is being predictable, is that predictability is what makes a man dependable? Uh, give me your spin on that.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to answer your question, is it offensive? I think it could be, depending on the context and the intention behind the person saying it. I think a lot of times when people hear if in the way that you phrased it, a woman speaking of her man as predictable. When I first hear that, I think about that as I would hear a negative connotation to it, right? Mm-hmm. But again, without context, that's me putting my narrative on it based on what I think is socially acceptable. Okay, what I think is the norm, and what most people, how they might perceive a comment like that, right? So in a social setting, if a woman was like, yeah, my man's predictable, it don't sound good. It don't sound like she's bragging about, her man and her, his qualities and that kind of thing. But I think to the point of the post and what I got from just what you spoke on and the little bit I got a chance to read, is that it absolutely is a positive quality and trait. And in that context, related to So, okay, I will put it like this. I think when you look at responsibility in most environments, you're going to have a level of consistency and predictability. So even by itself, the essence of being responsible or looked at as being responsible is kind of saying that this person's able to respond to the given situation, right? Whatever challenge may be facing them. So if you're saying that this person can respond a certain way, or you predict that this person is going to respond a certain way, then that is, in essence, predictable.
Okay.
Right? You're
But
predicting.
we're talking about you.
Okay.
Does this have anything, does being predictable, do you see that being anywhere near in association with you being dependable as a man? Do you feel like being predictable because you're married?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say you're predictable, or if I say to a man you're predictable, I mean, and depending on the consistency, I'm talking about reliability. You're very reliable, right. Okay, which is a good thing. So if we make that more personal with you as a man, do you think that a Kamaye depends on your predictability in her association with you being a particular type of man, one that got her to do something that she said she wasn't going to do?
No, absolutely. There's a level of predictability, especially when it comes to the ways in which we depend on each other. So right now, she can expect me to bring in a certain amount of income. She can expect me to show up at X location if I say I'm going to be there.
Okay.
I mean, these are just the day in, day out routine and what allows for a relationship to operate smoothly, especially when you got children involved and you have to manage not only the relationship but the household and the economics and everything that goes into maintaining a livelihood.
Okay, so what about when you're talking about in terms of predictability on an emotional level? Even with yourself emotionally, are you able to handle your own emotions? Are you able to admit, emotion, commit emotionally? Some men have a problem even answering what they would term as an emotional, a question from a woman that they think requires an emotional response. Some tend to withdraw because they're afraid that it's entrapment. So when we're talking about predictability based on emotions, where are you in that mix? Do you shut down emotionally when it comes to having to deal with emotional issues in your relationship? When we're dealing with predictability, your type of predictability that a Kamaye and say even your daughters depend on emotionally, where are you in the schematics of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would explain it as there's been growth and development. So in this culture, in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
specifically as a black man,
Mm-hmm.
or really men in general,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very entrenched culture
Mm-hmm.
that looks at emotional expression in certain ways as taboo or weak or a number of other adjectives or whatever.
Right.
Now, I feel like I have baggage as it relates to that
Mm-hmm.
that shows up, but there's a lot of work that's been done in that regard. And a lot of that work with us in terms of my partner and our relationship was done as we became friends, and the more we got to know each other, the more we opened up, and the more vulnerable we were willing to be with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So with that vulnerability comes trust. And with her knowing that I've been vulnerable, it's kind of like you don't go back. You don't go backwards. If you step out in public naked, you out there. So trying to cover up, you know what I'm saying, after you've been out there,
Right.
it's kind of, in my opinion, they done seen you already. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, that may be a crude analogy, but I think you get what I'm saying, in that she's seen me open up about my best or my worst,
Mm-hmm.
the things that have been the hardest for me. So as we move throughout life in day-to-day operations, she is tuned in and sensitive to what I got going on and my energy.
Right.
So even if I didn't want to share, she's able to detect what I got going on a lot of times, regardless of if I'm trying to express it outwardly or not. I could be silent, and her sensitivity can pick up on what's the vibe or energy I might be on.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So would you say that falls in alignment with what it says about what the masculine energy is as knowledge, whereas the feminine is knowing?
Hmm.
Because you said
I
like,
think absolutely,
okay.
absolutely. I think that's a good way to describe that. So it's interesting. When I read the post, there were parts that seemed to make emotion or the expression of emotion or being emotional a negative thing. It sounded like it wasn't overt by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like if some people read it wrong, it could be interpreted as emotional expression as a negative thing or
Predictability,
not.
dependability.
Well, what I often find is that there is a dichotomy that is often created
Mm-hmm.
where you got logic on one end, emotion on the other. You have predictability on one end and erratic or, um, you know, volatile on the other.
Okay, so we are we looking, are you thinking in terms of left brain, right brain, as
I
far
think
as
that's part of it, but we all have left brains and right brains,
right?
two hemispheres to our brain.
Yes.
So I don't want to negate that there are differences that will show up in patterns as it relates to how women may operate versus men.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think you're dealing with a continuum. You're dealing with a spectrum versus a dichotomy, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay.
And if it is better for some, a complementary of opposites versus a opposition.
Okay. So if a Kamaye was to come in right now
Uh-huh.
and she was to say, your being predictable uh, makes her feel confident in you, in your being dependable as a man, and she would say that, and if she said, you know, if you weren't predictable, then your being able to depend on you would be kind of, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it plays into a sense of security.
Yes.
If you have a pattern that you can follow, if you've got the rhythm, it makes you comfortable, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
from what I've seen in my studies, our culture, when I say our, I'm speaking to African civilizations and the cultures that grew out of this area, our ancestors
Mm-hmm.
that laid the foundation and the groundwork for what we see today in everything, sciences, technology, whatever you want to speak to, it was there, right? So I what I see is a heavy emphasis on understanding the science of nature, the patterns of nature, of the universe.
Okay.
Those were the things that allowed us to quote unquote predict the future.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand that this part of the year is going to be like this, and it's going to take this many days or rotations
Mm-hmm.
to get to that, I can plan
Mm-hmm.
and I can have a certain expectation that my plan will go as planned, as predicted or desired,
Mm-hmm.
based on the patterns that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the more people have patterns, the more a culture is built. That's what culture is built on.
Okay.
The patterns of how we relate to each other, be it through food, through communication, through relationships and how we engage, right? And what becomes acceptable and what doesn't.
Okay.
All these things are rooted in dependability and predictability.
Okay.
Knowing what response you can get from a issue that may come up
Mm-hmm.
without knowing ahead. So, for instance, Netatep or DEBRA.
AKA.
Yes, you know that if we had a challenge that came up between us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Say it was as we're setting up to get ready to do this podcast
Right.
or this webinar.
Yes.
You have an idea how I would respond to that issue or that challenge. The fact that all you'd say is, I'm cool and relaxed and all of that.
Yeah.
You have a certain expectation of how I would respond.
I've come to depend on that,
Exactly.
because I've been around you at certain times, and I've even experienced when you uh, became firm and got that point across. So yes, I've come to expect a certain type of, dependability from you as a man. Um,
Right.
Not in particular because you are a black man, however, because
Sure.
you are a man and I know that I can depend on you uh, without, and within reason, you know.
Sure. Sure. And I think the more people are bonded and the more people have been vulnerable and exposed themselves,
Mhm.
the more predictable that person is.
Yes.
So a lot of times I'll say it's really challenging to know how it would be to be in a relationship, quote unquote romantic, if that's what you term you want to use, or intimate relationship. Um, if you haven't fought with that person, if you haven't had some level of significant conflict or disagreement, to see how that person responds in that state of emotion where you're dealing with anger or fight or flight, things like that. Because people's history, their experiences, trauma often will inform how we respond in those times where we're not thinking with our logical brain, if you will, and we're being driven more by instinct.
So when you and Akamaye have come to some of those crossroads, because you mentioned, fight or flight, or,
Mm-hmm.
those two things that are usually come up immediately in not just I rather use the term affectionate relationship rather than romantic.
Sure, sure.
Because when we start talking about romantic, then that
You're
brings
talking
in
about Rome and
whole
all that.
all of that. So I tend to want to use an affectionate
Mm-hmm.
relationship.
Well, just for the sake of,
Yeah,
I know viewers and making sure it's
right,
understood, because
right.
affection could be children and,
And but
elders and all of that. So,
right, but more
but yeah, we're on
importantly,
the
I
same
want us
page.
to stick to the topic of, do you feel like, are you agreeing that predictability uh does make a man dependable?
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
I think they're related.
Okay.
I
Okay.
wouldn't say
Good.
it's causal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a relationship there. I wouldn't say it's a cause and effect relationship. Um, Being predictable does not make you dependable.
Okay.
You can be predictably whack and not show up or not be present, or, you could be predictably abusive,
Yes.
but that's not what we want.
Mm-hmm.
However, predictability is what I think we use as humans to help assess our interactions, our environment, and that is why when you are being dependable, you would like it to be in ways that bring value to people.
Okay, so now I want you to stay with it. Just for the sake of this topic, I want you
Okay.
to stay very gender,
Okay.
masculinity, the male. I want you to stay, just for the sake of this topic, uh, confine it to where, would other men agree with you that predictability is a uh, character trait that men should cultivate when they're talking about a different approach to love, or an approach to love, whether it's self-love, a certain type of predictability for themselves before they even begin pursuing a relationship. you know what part of you needed to be predictable so that you could depend on yourself,
Right.
bring
Right.
it in and keep it in a gender, as relates to, how they're both relatable, predictability and dependability, dealing with your nature.
It's okay. So it's interesting to focus on the gender because I don't know that it is gender specific. I think the behaviors that come with an individual may have a socially accepted gender association,
Well, I'll deal
but
with the female. I'll find a female to handle the predictability and dependability, as a trait in a female, because, as was laid out, when it comes to the gender of
mhm,
men, we're talking about structures, we're talking about, foundations, we're talking about rules, things that are more concrete when we talk about accessibility, because you mentioned, dependability as being, like as far as a particular type of financial, dependability, predictability, a Kamaye, she can predict and depend. She may not predict, how much income. She just knows. See, because it says that masculine is knowledge and feminine is knowing. So that's why I said I want you to keep it, tight as a gender, because I've watched other men, you and some of the other brothers like Mel Ellis be around each other. What is the brother's name? Larry Bird. Is it Bird? Larry Bird?
you got it. Mhm.
Yes. And I've seen a type of camaraderie that is quick because of the type of predictability and dependability that I've seen you all circulate amongst yourselves as men. So,
Yeah. So I don't want to make it sound like gender doesn't play a part in it because I definitely think it does.
yes.
I just don't think it's so when we speak to the gender being a factor as men just need to be dependable,
And predict.
that then I would find, maybe issue with that.
Okay.
But yes, I think men are often dependable in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And those behaviors, especially in this culture, are often expected to be things like protection,
Mm-hmm.
being able to provide a sense of security, be it financial, physical, or otherwise. I believe that there's certain expectations around. Let's see, I hear a lot in
Can I read
the
something
Western
to you?
world about running the house or order leadership.
Right.
And I think that there's issues when maybe that's taken on in a blanket way. In my mind, women represent the organizing principle in the universe,
Okay.
in that they bring life and organize all of what needs to be organized
Structure
to
and
create
rule.
and deliver
Yeah.
all of that. It don't get no more organized than that,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So I definitely feel that there are certain organizational principles that it's going to be necessary for men to have to be successful in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
But to say men are supposed to be putting rules or order in place as a blanket statement, I think that's a little too big of a claim.
Okay.
Yeah. And would really need to look at what the specifics of that might be.
Okay, listen at this. Why being predictable is actually a great thing according to science. First, people who think of themselves as more predictable and less complex tend to enjoy positive life events more. Second, though a lot of organizations pretend to celebrate disruptors, creatives, and unpredictable personalities, the reality is that you are much more likely to get rewarded at work if you behave in more consistent and predictable manners. For instance, most people prefer to work for a boss who is predictable and consistent to the point of being boring. So, do you think being predictable as a man who is establishing a certain type of dependability within that relationship is seen as boring to its
No, I
counterpart?
think it's about knowledge of self.
Okay.
When it comes down to it, in my opinion, we all are spiritual beings that are a collection, and we represent a lot in our ancestors, our environment, and what we have been dropped into as far as culture or raised up in, if that's a better way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you as an individual
Right.
know that I like to iterate, I like to be able to respond spontaneously and move in a way that is agile and flexible,
Mm-hmm.
you can be that and do that. And people can find comfort in being able to predict that that is how you are.
Mm-hmm.
But to say being spontaneous, creative, flexible is problematic in general, no, I mean, that's, and that's, it's necessary. We have to have creation. It's a part of us existing.
Okay.
So I think there's a focus on the actual behaviors versus the consistency of that particular individual,
Okay.
be it a man or a woman, and what that might be. I believe wholeheartedly that because we are a part of a ordered system that we call the universe,
Mm-hmm.
it's in our nature to be rhythmic, to be able to exhibit patterns and things that repeat, essentially.
That are associated with being predictable.
Absolutely.
Okay. In imitation of what the universe itself um, reflects and mirrors.
Absolutely correct.
And so that would
But
be a
again,
good thing for men to be able to imitate what you're saying is also a reflection in nature itself.
yes, whenever you get to a point where it's hard to predict behavior,
Mm-hmm.
you get to the place where people start to talk about mental illness
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature, because it can make it hard for you to function
Right.
in everyday society.
Yes. So
So the more predictable you can be
mm-hmm.
can often speak to the more success you can have.
Okay.
But again, it's not necessarily specific behaviors. So, for instance, Michael Jordan, let's say, he was able to be depended on because of his predictability at scoring the basket,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that he was always a nice guy, or you could predict that he's going to be, your best friend and buddy.
Mm-hmm.
He might get mad and get emotional and punch out one of his teammates in practice because he's mad at how they are playing or whatever.
Right.
But when it comes to what he has expressed to the world and said, as a man, I stand on this.
Mm-hmm.
You can depend on me for this.
Right.
That is what I think women want as a man, or from a man,
Okay.
is whatever that might be, that you state are your principles, your values, your aspirations, and the ethic that you claim that you will put forth to achieve these things are what build you as a man, your integrity.
Okay.
Integrity is nothing without dependability. It doesn't make, it can't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's critical.
So would you say that integrity is at the, um, is it like a very high priority within becoming predictable and dependable? I mean, because you have to address that integrity within your own self, you know. Um,
I don't think the perspective is having predictability or dependability as the goal,
mm-hmm.
but I do think the goal is more about, how would I say it? You being true to yourself and the people that you interact with.
Okay. Expecting from
So
yourself what others would expect from you, or you would expect from others.
it's really personal. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you know what you expect of yourself,
Right.
and you also know if you are going to do the work, or I should say, have a habit of doing the work
Yeah.
to meet that.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come down to it, we all have a reputation or a way that people expect us to show up. And as much as we may have cognitive dissonance and think of ourselves as, something great, there's going to be times when we don't show up for certain people in certain times or whatever. And it's going to leave a tarnished image of you in that person's mind and what they can expect.
Right.
So
now I want to ask you to do one thing for me. I need you
okay.
to slide back over because you're starting to act like you want to get off the screen.
Okay. I got you.
Yes, stay with us now. You can't get up out of here yet. I want to read one more thing as we get near to wrapping it up. Why being predictable is actually a great thing according to science. Another thing, scientific research has also linked the need for uniqueness to narcissistic tendencies, and alarmingly shows that the tendency to see ourselves as unique and special has been rising significantly during the last few decades, particularly among US college students. So yes, We are all unique, just like everybody else. Perhaps it is time to actually embrace predictability. In fact, psychological studies indicate that there are several disadvantages to being and seeing yourself as unpredictable. Address that, and then we'll get ready
Yeah.
to wrap this up. So I'm going to say this again. It says, perhaps, is it time to actually embrace predictability?
I think that is a very poignant question
For men,
for this reason.
dealing with the gender of men embracing being that
Okay.
predictability.
So when I hear that, I don't see it as a static phenomenon as far as a more individualistic concept or expression versus a more predictable collective group think type of or group behavior type of expression. I'm not going nowhere. I'm not going to get off the camera.
Okay.
So I believe that it kind of moves in phases or like a cycle. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll find is there'll be times when the creative, the individual, the unique
Mm-hmm.
is more, it gets more attention. It may be more valued
Mm-hmm.
and may be more prominent during certain times.
Mm-hmm.
And then things may shift where the thing that came out of that creativity
Mm-hmm.
starts to become the norm
Mm-hmm.
and takes on a new reality in the group
Mm-hmm.
as the group takes on this identity
Mm-hmm.
and moves in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cycle starts to shift because everything has to change. It's like a spiral, if you will. It's going to grow and it's going to shift and move,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a pattern to it and there's an order to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't stay stagnant and expect that what you do today and the way that you move and operate is going to be effective exactly the way it is 10, 20, 50, 1,000 years down the line.
So I need you to make that relevant to men, because as we wrap
Okay.
up, I need you
So
to address to men.
when it comes to the role that men have
Mm-hmm.
in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
this same cyclic, rotational or
Yes.
thing I think exists
Mm-hmm.
based on the needs of that time and that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if I were to speak on current times, I think that there's very much so a need for more of a cohesive and predictable expression,
For men.
especially from Black men in the United States
Okay.
specifically. Now, if you want me to speak on others, I know you're talking about men. I know different cultures are different things.
No, I need.
So I don't want to go too far and
Right.
make it a blanket statement for men across the board.
Right.
But when I speak to the Black community in the United States
Mm-hmm.
and men's role in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like because of the need for us to build stability
Mm-hmm.
and strength,
Mm-hmm.
you do that through discipline and routine
Mm-hmm.
and the predictable types of behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like working out.
Yes.
If you're in the process of trying to gain muscle,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a certain kind of routine
Repetition.
versus if you're not interested in a certain type of output.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And in the time that we're living in, with the needs that we have in our community, the needs that we have in our relationships, I do think that men are needing to be more predictable and dependable,
Okay.
so that as a community, we can get our legs underneath us, if you will,
Yeah.
and start the process, or I should say, continue the process of nation building,
Mm-hmm.
so that as a sovereign
Mm-hmm.
who is not dependent on an external entity for survival,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you can get creative and fun with it, you know? I mean,
Right.
but essentially that's kind of how it worked out. When you went to the continent, historically, we had a lot going for us.
Right.
The climate was allowing for us to be able to pick food off the trees, if you will. And that environment alone allows us to not have to worry about certain survival needs.
Mm-hmm.
So you can understand how in a state where, let's say, bringing it back to relationships,
Mm-hmm.
where all your needs are met,
Mm-hmm.
you're not worrying about your food, shelter,
Mm-hmm.
the necessities.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you space and time to be able to imagine and explore new things and create new things.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have that luxury
Mm-hmm.
and you're more focused on maintaining
Survival.
the survival needs,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't give you that freedom.
Right.
You have to respond to other needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I appreciate you so much for because I know I switched it all up on you. I just out of
It's
the
all right. It's good. I mean, I
it's
think
all
it
right. It's
was
all
a
right.
good post, and the topic was right on.
I appreciate you so much, CJ, for because I'm gonna have some other men come on and because I want some other perspectives, from other men. Yet I thought that it was very important to as a topic in dealing with love and relationships and the different approaches and why we have these different approaches and why we look for certain traits in men and in the men looking for certain traits in the female. And then when you have offspring, the children are looking for a certain type of predictability and dependability from their parents. So it all factors in for when we talk about, as you said, being cyclic and uh, and what I would say orbital. That
Mm-hmm.
roundness, that wholeness. So once again, the Deborah Show and Deborah Faye, we appreciate you so much coming on. And when the family comes in, give them some of that predictable love. You're not off the hook yet. You're not off the hook yet. I know you know it's coming. You know it's coming. Hold on. See, gotta spin my pinwheel. Get that pinwheel love going. You know what I'm saying?
I need to give me a penguin.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you one. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna
Okay,
get you and the
okay.
whole family some pinwheels, and we're gonna all send each other some pinwheel love. Through this pandemic, you know, so we can stay on top of it. But the main thing you got to get ready to say, you ready?
Come on.
Come on. Be
Different
and
and
love it.
love it.
Now come on with it. Be different and love it.
Be different and love it.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
All right now.
All right, and thank you, WNT9 Network, which is the DEBRA Show is a part of the WNT9 network. You can find them on YouTube as well as on Anchor FM.fm. The DEBRA Show is also on Anchor.fm. Look for the NT9 Talk Radio podcast with King Henry and CJ. Give me my virtual hug. Come on, C. I love it. All right. Peace.
All right now. Talk to you
All
soon.
right. Peaceful vibrations.